Hi, I'm Dan. I'm the head of SEO at Journey Further.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm an SEO analyst at Journey Further.
And we're going to talk to you today about some of the common pitfalls of site speed optimization and how we mitigate those for our clients at Journey Further. Right, so first question is, what metrics should we be using and what do we focus on here at Journey Further?
So I am always a big fan of making sure we're using real world data. So a lot of people will look at lab data, so they'll use like Google Lighthouse, PageSpeed Insights, which is great for establishing what the basic problems are on a page. But when it comes to understanding what Google is seeing and what Google wants to measure for rankings, using real world data is just so much more reliable. So my go-tos are always Google Search Console and then looking at Crux data as well, which just give you a much more accurate picture of what your users are getting.
Yeah, and it's really good because obviously Google update that Crux data every month, and it's real customers that are signed into their site speed scheme. So we can actually see what people accessing your site and what the speeds they're getting. And I think the key benefit of that is really that compared to something like a lab test like Lighthouse, which is a throttled 3G connection or a simulated throttled 3G connection, you're actually seeing the performance of your site on the actual connections that people are using. You know, most phones are going to be 4G, even 5G now. Wi-Fi and broadband at home are pretty quick, so I think it's really good to make sure you can do that.
Yeah, exactly. I always find with your real world data as well, it lets you identify straight away if there's a problem. So if I get a new client and I'm doing a site speed audit for them, my first port of call is, right, let's have a look on Search Console, let's look at the page experience report. Are they failing on any of your core web vital metrics? So have they got poor LCP scores? Have they got poor CLS scores? And then I'll go in and set up a Chrome User Experience Report dashboard that we've been working on in-house, and essentially that lets you immediately identify, do I need to be concerned about this? And from there I then jump into your lab data, which shows you a little bit more minutely what the problems are and where we can start looking for fixes for them.
Yeah, and I think moving kind of a step further, like we have with a few clients, you know, is implementing that GA tracking, the Web Vitals GA tracking that pushes all the data into GA with an event. And then we've made some pretty cool dashboards for our clients and making sure that we can really drill down into offending pages, commonly offending pages, because obviously in Search Console, you're only getting a sample. Crux, you're only getting site-wide data unless you're manually running the URLs, so it's really powerful to have that data, and again it allows us to really see what pages are performing well. I think there's still pitfalls to that sometimes, so if on the particular client, if they do an email shot to a certain page, we do see massive spikes in slow LCP scores or CLS scores because the server can't respond quickly enough.
I think the other thing that we've seen with that as well is if you put all the event tracking on for all your core web vitals and you've got a big site, you end up spending a lot of GA budget. So
you do. You probably need to be selective on it if you've got a normal site, because fortunately the client that we put it on can afford to pay for millions of events hitting GA every single day. But yeah, not all clients. You could really, well, you'd probably hit a limit and it'd be very highly sampled in normal analytics, and in 360 you'd start incurring additional costs to track all that data. So yeah, it is probably worth thinking about what are the core pages. You can maybe use Search Console to identify where your problems are and deploy it on those pages as well.
I think the only other alternative we've talked about in the past that I've used on a few clients is if you can't get the GA tracking set up or you don't have the GA budget, is using BigQuery to interrogate Crux data at a URL level. It's still more time consuming than GA, but it's less time consuming doing manually, and does mean we still got that page level data, which once you've established that there is a problem, is so useful in identifying which templates are causing those issues. Because you might find as an EA that it's only on your homepage, in which case you've got a fairly decent quick fix rather than having to look at the entire site. So it's important to get that level of data in. Yeah,
I agree on that. I think it's that kind of point as well where I think that lab data, like you say, spotlights issues really clearly for you. The run data spotlights issues really clearly for you. I think what I sometimes find an issue is, although the lab tools are great for kind of identifying fixes, particularly Lighthouse, because it's nice and clear what you need to do. Well, I mean, PageSpeed Insights obviously used to be the sort of poor little brother of Lighthouse, but it is essentially the same thing these days. Is that you don't always find fixes, or it doesn't always flag things that are wrong. So I think, again, the client that's got GA tracking, there was a CLS issue that was coming through the GA. It was showing up in Crux. It was also being flagged by another site speed tracking tool that the client uses. But you put it through Lighthouse and it's like, oh, it's fine. I'm like, no, it isn't.
Yeah,
and
Lighthouse, it sometimes misses stuff, and also it's incredibly vague sometimes. So my go-to kind of method for identifying if there's issues with site speed and also fixing them is I start with GSC and Crux. We can see problems over time with that. We can see what the big issues are. I then start running identified templates through Lighthouse. By and large, the biggest thing I get from Lighthouse is some of the little fixes, but it's identifying the LCP element is what I find really useful with Lighthouse. At that point, I then start looking at more third-party tools like Web Page Test, where we can get a waterfall breakdown of, okay, so I know CLS is an issue, I know LCP is an issue, what is blocking the render, what's causing the delay in those, and again, identifying the LCP element, because sometimes it doesn't agree with Lighthouse, and at that point,
that's true. I think Web Vital, the Web Vital section in Web Page Test is really useful as well. That I think they've integrated it into the main tool now, haven't they? But that being able to spotlight the elements, I think some of the best advice I ever saw on this was a site speed talk by, I think it was by Tammy Everts, and her advice was very simply, sometimes just watch the page load.
100%.
And I think if you go into like film strip view in Web Page Test is great for that, or even the video if you kind of want to animate it and show it to a client. You can download it as a GIF now, which is really useful.
That GIF function is my most useful tool for demonstrating CLS to a client. We have a lot of tools that kind of highlight elements, but it's quite difficult to see visually. If you can get that GIF and slow it down and then essentially say to a client, look, you can see your entire menu banner, for example, is moving your entire page. We need to fix it. It's so much clearer than any other descriptor.
I think where then I still found that all those tools fell down is if something's below the fold and it's causing CLS issues, you can't see it because you only get a snapshot from the top of the page. And it kind of, you then got to get manual. You've got to open up DevTools and start getting a bit techie with the settings and slowing it down to really slow 3G.
Yeah, that is a tip that I learned from you, and it's so helpful. Like just trying to be able to find, like even just like little things that I've had clients that have got poor LCP scores because they're lazy loading hero images. Like you can see that so clearly if you throttle it. And it's really useful.
It just allows you to spotlight those connections. And in the case of that client, it was a CLS issue because of lazy loading. Yeah. So the lab tool wasn't triggering it because the lazy load on scroll, so it didn't see a problem because the images didn't load. Yeah. So because nobody scrolled, and it's like, it's fine. But when the Crux data and the real user data we had in GA was people were scrolling down the page and these images were lazy loading, and then because there was no width and height specified, jumped everything around the page, and they also didn't load very smoothly, so things were going all over the place. It's really useful for being able to do that. Another key thing which we've already touched on while we were talking about the real user data is using third-party tools and technology to identify issues. So I know obviously we say like we've spoken about Lighthouse, and it is something that I think when I discovered that was a thing, it was just like and it was originally a Chrome extension before they'd even added it into DevTools, which was great because it was a Chrome extension, so it actually slowed your site down because it was JavaScript. But it was a game-changing thing. It was the first time that I was like, wow, this is really useful. It's not just page speed insights, which is anybody. It doesn't really tell you anything, and it just really drilled down into problems. I don't know what was the one tool that really sort of set you off with site speed. And
I mean, for me, like I started with Lighthouse, but coming into the SEO game slightly later than you, it was already in DevTools was how I got here. But yeah, that was my go-to for I think the first few months I worked on site speed. After that, it essentially was looking at interrogating the data myself. So setting up the Chrome User Experience dashboard we use in-house now, which is still incredibly useful. So essentially that lets us see not only our clients' data, so we can see that our clients' data broken down by Core Web Vital, broken down by device, broken down by browser. And then it also lets us see how that's changed over time, so we can then verify if any of our fixes have worked, but we can also have a look, and if we know the client's done something like migrate their website, we can see if something's gone badly wrong. But it also allows us to compare with their identified competitors, which is incredibly useful in Core Web Vitals because, as Google says, it's a differential ranking factor. It matters that you are, not just that you're doing well as and of yourself, it matters that you're doing better than your competitor. So that's really, really useful. Other than that, I think Web Page Test is my go-to now. So that's something I started using here. It's incredibly useful. In that form strip view and that waterfall view are just unrivaled in pretty much any other tool. You can identify kind of how things are moving on page, and at that point we can then turn to our internal tool, which is the Cls Checker, so we can highlight exactly which elements are moving around on that page. So you've got like a full walkthrough to fix your problems, which...
Yeah, quick shout out for Cls Checker and Steve Walker there as well, who made that, our technology director. Download it on the Chrome store, give us a review. But yeah, that was told. I mean, actually, that was a really interesting piece of work, the Cls Checker. So it was something that obviously I feed into it, but Steve's been working on. He's a techie guy in terms of like developing. And yeah, we were coming. We had it in originally. It was just in DevTools, and it was just numbers. And we basically had X and Y coordinates, and it was just it told you what elements were moving, and you could kind of go and inspect it and hover over them, but it wasn't particularly user friendly. And actually, a lot of what transpired was us chatting with a client about it, and I was running through the tool in DevTools, and it would be really useful actually if you could have it so that it's highlighted where the images had moved from, and you could see that a red box where it originally was and a green box where it ends up. And that's how, kind of where we evolved the Chrome extension into being like it is now. And again, it's really useful for showing clients, isn't it? You screenshot it and go, it was here, it's now here. So is this, and this, and we can see it's because that thing up there is moving down the page, or is loading late and changing the size. And I think that's why it's really useful.
Yeah.
Just skipping back to Web Page Test though, I think it's the thing that makes it most useful, but it's the thing that makes it really inaccessible, is that there is so much data in it, and there is so much you can do with it. I've actually got a book on Web Page Test, and I've still not like
a whole book.
A whole book. It's literally that thick. Like,
wow. I mean, there's a lot in there.
There's so much you can do with it that we don't always do. So, if we're testing render blocking resources, for example, you can actually go in and go, all right, don't load this JavaScript file and see what impact that has on speed.
That'd be really useful for so many of our clients.
Yeah, it's tricky to set up. I've never really cracked it, but I think that's something that we really could do with working on, and it's just useful for being able to say if you either remove this or refine this, it'll make the page a lot quicker.
Particularly when you get those JavaScript files that are like 97% unused on a page, it would be so interesting to say, right, what are we actually getting from you? Is it, because quite often, like if you're in marketing, you might not know exactly what the impact of that JavaScript file is. So yeah, it'd be great to be able to see that. I'd like to investigate that a bit more.
Speaking of marketing, and potentially not upsetting the other divisions in the business, but tracking tags clearly are one of the massive issues that we always see. They're always JavaScript. Marketing departments always love sticking them on the website, and I'm seeing some sites where like there's 30 tracking tags on it, but then you go through it and they go, oh yeah, I don't think we use that anymore. Like, well, take it off your website, then it's actively slowing it down.
One of my biggest ones recently has been Google Optimize, which isn't something that's that commonly used, but my God, it's created some massive LCP issues for my client because it essentially just render blocks. The irony of that being is that they're trying to improve the conversion rate of the page, and yet it's actually slowing the page down. It's probably going to reduce the conversion rate. Luckily, it's going sometime soon. I think, so.
But yeah, it's always that you've got to have kind of cost benefit analysis of those things. It's like clearly, like you can't get rid of a Facebook pixel or whatever it might be, because you need that. We need that to do our jobs. There's so much stuff like is it Floodlight, all the kind of stuff that the PPC team use as well. You need those things, but I think it's lots of endless mark-on technology that goes on the sites, and like you said, people not using it properly or not even using it, or there's maybe a better solution than that. I know, I can't remember the client now, but they had a tool, something again, a tracking tag or a script that was running on the page, and I looked into it. I was like, you can load this asynchronously so that it won't block render. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll just do that then. And he was just like,
it's just finding easy fixes, isn't it?
And they're like, oh yeah.
Always like that moment though, where you're just like, it's actually quite easy, this one.
Yeah. I always like those.
Yeah.
There's few and far between these days because clearly a lot of effort internally and externally has gone into making sites faster with Core Web Vitals. But I think it's always useful to be able to test these things. And I think one of the tools particularly that Steve uses is called Debug Bear. That kind of works in staging environments as well. Clearly a beauty of Lighthouse as well, but it actually means that you can track performance in the staging environments, see if the fixes the dev team are putting into place are actually having that impact that you want. I mean, you would usually assume they do, but you never know in the real world.
It's also useful on sites like where you're migrating and you're setting up a new site, like being able to have a look before it goes live to get a read on, is this going to have an impact on my site speed on Core Web Vitals?
And I think, it's really useful for that ongoing monitoring when you've not got something, or maybe got the resource to be able to use the GA tracking for Web Vitals. Obviously it requires some analytics time to set it up, and it's a bit of code needs to go on the site, and then you need to set it up and some new tags and things in Tag Manager to push the events into GA. But that, and I guess there's masses of data around. We've got so many insights out of that. We're working on it with clients, but the client needs to have the budget to actually be able to deploy it. We've only really done it with clients who had a dedicated team working on site speed, because otherwise it's just too much information for some people. It's like, well, there's all this. I'm like, oh yeah, well, we'll put it in the dev queue and we'll see when we get to it. Exactly. And at that point you're like, well, there's not really a lot of point in doing this. We may as well just use the other data that's on offer. But if you can, I think any granular real user data is so useful to be able to validate your fixes.
I think that's kind of like the beauty of like that set of tools that we talked about, is that you get a great mix of, you've got the data, so we know exactly what we need to be doing, and we can tell our SEO contacts exactly what we need to be doing. But then using things like Cls Checker, web page test, you can get those kind of more top level insights that show someone this is wrong on a page in a way that's really visible. They don't need tech background to understand it, so that we can get buy-in from everyone that we need before we then put the fix in the dev queue.
And ultimately the dev queue by and large isn't controlled by the SEO team. We've been very fortunate on some clients that the site speed stuff is controlled by the SEO team, but it isn't always. So sometimes you either need to get the head of IT or head of devs buy-in, or even a senior stakeholder in the business if it's an external dev agency that they're working with, and there's businesses working through other priorities. You need to be able to go, actually no, we really need to work on this, and being able to show them something visual is really useful. The one thing I kind of forgot about web page test, I should use it more, is when you can set up again all the competitor sites in there as well and watch the pages load. It's so brilliant. The first time I used that in a client meeting, and the senior stakeholder was looking at all these competitor sites loading quickly. His was still a white page, and he was like, "We need to fix this." I was like, I've been trying to tell you that for a while.
If there's anything that gets senior stakeholders interested, it's saying, look how much better your competitors are doing at this point. It's
I think
a surefire win.
That I think I first started using that when Google did a site speed review for one of my clients, and obviously I jumped in the meeting to be like, oh, can I have a listen? And that was really useful to see how they audited site speed. And I think it was when I started shifting my focus to the perceived site speed, which is obviously what Core Web Vitals has really brought into focus. But it meant that you were looking at, you weren't just going, oh, it loads in X. It was, is the hero image loaded? Which I did look at before LCP came in. I always got to point out, but it's critical, and I think it's translating. Yes, Core Web Vitals is a ranking differentiator between two sites, but largest contentful paint is clearly the most important for SEO, because if your image doesn't load, if your header or your category text doesn't load quickly enough, your customer might bounce back to the search results, they might go to another site. And it's also, I think one of the key things Google always says, people don't operate in isolation. If they go on a competitor site and it's a better experience, it's faster, they probably won't come back to you.
Yeah, there's also a thing with LCP as well, talking about being more important for SEO. It's the one that we've seen the most impact on. Yeah, we've got clients that fail quite heavily on CLS but haven't seen much of a hit since that update, whereas LCP seems to be the big one. And also when we validated fixes, LCP is the one where they've seen the biggest improvement.
CLS is I have issues with CLS because it's not a speed metric, it's a user experience metric. And I know it was the user experience update, but Core Web Vitals really was speed focused. And what is the impact? Like, and the example Google uses, that was true. If you accidentally buy 20 of something instead of one of something, it's terrible. Yeah. But how often does that actually happen? All of the CLS issues pretty much I've seen are kind of images on a page loading, and what it might mean, and it's usually a listing page on an e-commerce site and you've got lots of images, and it's
you click on the wrong
you click on the wrong product. Well, it's a big deal. You go back and you click on the right one. Like, it is a little bit frustrating, but I think the sort of worst case scenario that Google put out there probably doesn't happen very much. And I think that's my issue with CLS. Interestingly though, I was digging into the Lighthouse weightings of the scores, and CLS actually used to be really low. It was like 5%. And even now it's still only like 15% of the overall performance score. And interestingly, first input delay is the highest of the Core Web Vitals singles. And then LCP after that. Yeah,
I've never had a client that had bad first input delay.
I've not had one with poor. There's some that have got needs improvement. I think again it's very subtle signal. You're talking hundreds of milliseconds, so it's quite short. It could be quite frustrating. I think customers would get frustrated if they're constantly tapping on the screen and nothing happens. I think that's when the delay really becomes obvious. But there's a term that the conversion team would use is rage clicking when you're on a desktop. You're just like,
I know that one. Yeah.
Like, it's not helping.
It's satisfying to do it. So.
It's like, why is this element not working? But I think combining all those tools together, I think is the key. I think.
Yeah, definitely.
I think the clarity that you have to have though is when you're reporting on metrics, you have to pick one for a client, because if you suddenly start bringing in all different metrics, people get confused, people don't know what they are. I mean, Core Web Vitals in itself, we had a recent challenge, which is from a client, which is why I was looking at the weightings of the signals, because the head of IT wanted a single metric. He didn't even want the 3 scores and the seconds, he just wanted one score that told him why his site was slow and or how fast his site was and whether it was getting any better week on week or longer term. So I kind of took I had to use the old one because Google, they used to be like just in a Google sheet, but the Lighthouse things moved to GitHub now, so you can't actually just mess around with it. But I managed to find, I'd already copied an old version, and then took the new weightings out of the current sheet and brought it down. It was useful to look at and think about, because it was kind of like, well, actually, what is, how is that score weighted? Because people always go, and previously I know there's been loads of talks about, we got, Breakthrough Web Vitals, we've got a Lighthouse score to 100%. I'm like, you realise that back when you were doing that, though, the Web Vital scores were pretty insignificant. Like, I think some of the biggest one was speed index at one point, which is not something people use very much because it's insanely complicated. It's something like the time at which 80% of the page is loaded and is visible, something like that. I watched a talk on it once, but it was about metrics. I didn't want an entire talk on speed index, but it was on metrics in general. But even I was like, not really sure what that tells you, and if we're doing that as SEOs, then the client's probably going to be like, I have no idea what this means. So I think picking metrics is a key thing. I think that's the big advantage of Web Vitals, is it put that real focus on it and gave you 3 things to look at. I still don't think they're the only things you should look at. I think sometimes as SEOs we might get caught into that trap a little bit. I think first contentful paint was a massive one that they didn't add on. I think that was from all the talks I'd seen, all the things you'd seen from Google on site speed, it was that you need to tell the customer that something's happening. And that's what first contentful paint does. It says this page is loading. I think one of the great terminology Google uses is talking about resetting the user's load clock. So when first contentful paint hits, they're like, oh, this page is loading, and you wait a bit. And then you get your LCP, and you're like, oh, the image is loaded, something's happening. And it's that point of you're working through and you understand, oh, this page is loading. And it's always that perception of things happening. It's why I think they've always talked about that perceived speed sometimes actually makes your page slower, but it makes the customer think the page is
happening
faster.
rather than waiting for nothing and then just all loading at like 3 seconds.
The best example of that in the real world that I heard about, I think if somebody at Google said it as well, was Houston Airport. They used to get loads of complaints that it took too long to get the bags onto the luggage carousel and people getting out of the airport. But they looked at it and the process is like, we're getting them on literally as fast as we can, but we're still getting loads of complaints. So they landed the planes further away from the terminal, so the bus ride took longer, and then the bags were there and waiting, and people were like, oh, this is brilliant.
It's just thinking about what is the user seeing at the end of it.
And it's kind of like, it's that point at which, making sure people are thinking about exactly what is happening, and you don't really think about, you've got to get from the plane to the terminal somehow, so you don't really think about how long that's taking, but it's just about making, because so, like, as the bottom of the page fully loaded, is everything fully loaded on that page? When you're looking at the top of the page, it doesn't really matter. I think that's the focus that Web Vitals has brought in, which is really useful. So I think one of the other questions is that I think a lot of people will ask, and something when you get into just start optimizing, if you're a more junior analyst, is what are the common pitfalls when it comes to optimizing for site speed?
Yeah, I think the most common one that we see from SEO analysts, both our side and client side, is definitely getting too involved in the data, which sounds strange, but sometimes you can overload yourself. What you find with site speed data is each tool tells you a slightly different thing. So you need to be mindful of why those scores are different and which one you actually want to choose and make sure that is consistent. So if you look at like the common scores people use to decide if their site speed is poor or not, realistically, you've got Google Search Console's page experience, Crux Report, and Lighthouse are the go-to. Search Console data is always mobile or desktop. And this sounds really simple, but remember that, because even I've fallen into this where I've looked at Search Console and then looked at Crux data and been like, why is it so different? And realised it's because I'm looking at Crux data across all devices. And actually, if you look at mobile or desktop, you understand immediately why that's happening. Lighthouse, again, you get a different score because Lighthouse is a slower connection, it's lab data, so you tend to get worse scores on Lighthouse than you would do anywhere else. So my go-to for establishing how bad is my site speed is Search Console, mobile, because mobile first indexing suggests that that's probably the more important thing, but also keeping an eye on Crux scores across devices so we can see if there is also a problem on desktop that might be solved by something different to what's on mobile. But yeah, that is probably the biggest pitfall to look out for. If you're just getting started in this, make sure you understand the scores and make sure you understand why they're different, because otherwise you can chase your tail on it so much not understanding it.
One of the key things as well as making sure you've got that clear metric, is tracking everything throughout. And like SEO sometimes get a little bit pilloried for doing audits all the time, but there's a real value in doing a site speed audit, so you know what your baselines are and you know what the templates are, and then making sure that you've got some sort of tracking process to log that data. I think that obviously we've spoken about the tools like Debug Bear and GA tracking and Crux, but I think it's important that you can set those up and baseline your information so that you know whether you've had an impact or not.
Yeah, definitely true. I mean, the way I do that is getting that Crux Data Studio dashboard set up, so you've got that over time, but also just making sure you've kind of got a manual log of everything. So in a Sheets document, we'll do kind of multiple Lighthouse runs and pull out the scores from that so that we can get an average across a few tries on it and then compare it after we made a fix. It's a little bit more manual, but it does mean that you get quite a decent read on particularly specific templates as well, so that we can see improvements there. I think is really, really useful.
Yeah, definitely, and I think just being able to show clients that improvement as well, going, we're taking care to here. I think there's other ways of doing it. I think the videos we spoke about earlier, if you've got one of those from right at the start, and then one when you've been doing the work, they're brilliant to put. Here's 2 videos. We're going to put them alongside each other. This is what it used to be like. This is what it's like now. And they go, oh wow, yeah, that does load faster.
Do you think, one thing is what we'd like to bear in mind in terms of pitfalls with site speed and core web vitals is making sure that you're not overcomplicating it to the client. You've got to bear in mind that it's very likely that if you're working with a marketing team or an SEO team that they're not going to be hugely technical in understanding this stuff. So if you can really visually, really clearly explain it using a video or a few simple metrics, it's so much better to do that than to pull up the entirety of web page test or really complex either Crocs report or GA data. Like just get it somewhere where there's a very clear point A, point B. This is where we're at.
I think that's where that consultancy approach comes in, and the fact that we speak to our clients a lot and we get to know them, and you know the levels. So you're like, you worked on clients with me where we'll just chat to them as we would ourselves, because they're SEOs and they know what we're talking about, and that's obviously great because you don't have to translate anything. You can just talk about it. But then you've got some people where they might not even really know what SEO even is, but you've got to explain to them why it is that we're focusing on that thing and why we're telling them to work on it and spend their money or time with the dev agency or whatever it might be. They've got to invest in it, and being able to be clearly articulate why it is that we're doing it.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like from my experience and the experience of our team, one of the big problems you run into is making sure we can get dev resource for this. It's not a common thing that most people talk about. Not everyone's aware of the impact it has. So making sure we have clear, concise, this is the problem, but also clear and concise, this is how to fix it for a dev. If you've got limited resource already, the more information we can give a dev, the better, because it means they are spending less essentially to get this fixed through. So if we can say exactly this element, it needs, for example, we need to fix LCP. This is the element on these templates that's causing it. The solution is to put a preload tag on. This is what the preload tag is. Put it in the head of your HTML. That's much better than saying there's an LCP problem, fix it. It's making sure that we do go to the nth degree as far as we can to make sure the devs got everything they need, so they're not having to spend their resource.
I think there's also that massive point with clients is that it's that cause and effect. Essentially what you're saying is that this is the cause of it, this is why it's a problem, and this is why it's having an issue on your site, and this is the impact it's having on your business. I think is an important one as well, and that's where the competitor comparisons come in. And I think another key thing as well with devs is kind of maintaining that conversation throughout the process, making sure you're testing in staging environments. Obviously, Lighthouse is brilliant for that in terms of spot checking, because it's in dev tools and you can test it anywhere. But I think you also need to be cautious about differences in environments as well. So there might not be a perfect environment. They might have taken the instance of the live site into staging at a different point, and they might just be working on it, and they might not be refreshing it. And I think that's something to be aware of as well.
I've had a staging site that was hosted on a different server, and the server was terrible. So that was an interesting one to try and test, because obviously we knew that was going to have an impact, but it's how big is it going to be when it goes live. So there are things to bear in mind.
It's like you've got staging on a slow local server, and your main site's on AWS or whatever, and you've got CDNs and all sorts of stuff flying around, and it's massive different in performance. So making sure that you're not getting the wrong scores. I think there's another point there where it feeds in is that you don't get trapped in the performance bubble, which is, we're sat in an office, we've got 250, 300 megabit internet. Got a high performance laptop, and this site's fine. There's nothing wrong with this.
I think that's where, when we talked earlier about making sure you use dev tools to throttle the speed, that's where that comes in, because I sit on client sites, and you're right, like you load them, like everything's there straight away, but we're not really real world users. We're set up in a place where we need the internet, so we've got very good connection. So changing that throttling, setting on 3G and essentially optimizing for your slowest possible user is something that is sensible.
I think, and it's something where I know you don't necessarily want to dig into the data and get caught up in it too much, but I think there's real opportunities to try and find out exactly where problems lie. And I think there's an example, it was from a guy called Tim Cadillac, and he was working with Mozilla, because they needed some help with their site speed for whatever reason, on their own site, presumably not Firefox, was really slow. And they were trying to find things where, you know, what's the problem here, and they managed to find it down. Like, there was a really specific resolution where the certain page was a lot slower of screen, and what they actually pulled it back to was it was a really common netbook in India. So it was a really low powered device in India, and lots of people were getting this really slow score on this page at this certain and so it was like, oh, actually what we can see is it's not just getting caught in a trap of you know, sometimes people go, oh well, the tools don't always replicate the real user, but sometimes the real user data doesn't always spotlight all of the user data. You might be, you know, there's lots of edge cases in there, and I think you need to optimize for the edge cases. I think sometimes it's a little bit easy just to go, oh well, everybody's gone fast internet, everybody's got high powered phones, everybody's got high powered laptops. Not everybody does. Not everybody's got somebody might be on a 10-year-old iPad, and they can get pretty slow once they get that age. And I think it's making sure that, you know, you are thinking that, well, actually not everybody is on the latest browser. I think that's a real key thing as well, is understanding what features you're recommending and where they work. So when I first started recommending preload, it was Chrome only. So
it's the same when you're recommending different image types. You know, like up until recently, if you were looking at next-gen images, you needed to look at, right, which one works for the browser users work most. Now you've got WebP that works on pretty much everything. You were right. But,
I kind of feel like that was just Apple making sure Google's image format didn't work. Like, oh, we're not going to add support to Safari, so it won't work. But yeah, I think that was a big change. I think that was what always my reticence to use WebP was always then having to have a fallback, and then you really starting to overcomplicate the code. You know, you've got to have an image source set, picture elements get involved, and suddenly what should be a relatively straightforward fix becomes a slightly more complicated fix. And then, you know, you're increasing the time, the cost, and whether then it potentially could outweigh the benefit. I think obviously image optimization is a massive thing to use, but I think it gives you really big gains early on. But yeah, you need to get a little bit, not just trying to shave off seconds if it's going to cause the devs a huge amount of work. And I think
going back to when you were talking about thinking about what the slowest user is, that has to be client specific as well, because there are certain sites where you'll find your demographic is maybe over 50 and is using maybe Internet Explorer, or you know, you've got a large audience in Japan where they use different browsers, and building that into how you're optimizing, because realistically, although you want to be optimizing for your slowest possible user, you also want to be optimizing for common experience as well, and that does change based on your client, and you know, that needs to be a focus.
I think that's as well. I think that's partly goes back to not just getting 100% in Lighthouse or whatever it is. It's like, well, yeah, that's fine, but really what we're not trying to please a tool. We're trying to please our customers. That's why, again, the real world data, we're going to keep coming back to it, but it's because are we making our site faster for our customers? That's what a client wants, and they want people to have a great experience, enjoy using the site, not think about speed, because that's, you know, negative signal in the process, in the buying process, and can sometimes put people off returning to a site if it's really slow. I think that's really key. I think as well, just understanding what can and can't be done on a certain site is really useful, which is where talking to the development teams come in. Also using things like Can I Use It? I think it's called Can I Use It, which is a website, and you basically say, can I use preload? And it'll tell you which browsers it works in and which versions. You can even plug it into GA, and it'll say X amount of your customers could benefit from this. So that's a really useful thing in terms of if we're suggesting something that might be time consuming for the devs to do, making sure we know how many people it will affect as well. because you can deploy something like, oh, why is it not made not all speeds go up? Like, well, because only 3% of your actual customers are benefiting from that additional speed. So again, it's that understanding of what tools can do, and that helps to then build trust with the dev teams as well, because I think that one of the key things, and we found it on a shared client where previous recommendations have just been do this, Lighthouse says this is slow, do this, do this. And then they do it, and it doesn't actually really make the site any better. And suddenly,
sometimes makes it worse.
Sometimes makes it worse.
Yeah, the implementations weren't checked.
Yeah,
that's again, it's a lesson learned in terms of when we're talking about making sure your devs are given really good instructions, because they don't always know this stuff. This is it's SEO based factors. So we've had examples where preloads haven't been implemented in really a correct way and have ended up slowing down the site, and then you've got a dev team that goes, well, we did this because an SEO said to, and now they already have a kind of, I'm not sure I trust the SEO anymore. So it's making sure that you are owning that relationship and making it as good as possible, not just for site speed, but once you've done that on something, then the relationship with your devs a little bit damaged.
Totally, and I think it's also understanding the work that goes into things, and like it's very easy to say, oh, you've got loads of unused JavaScript or you've got loads of unused CSS, like great, but what you're asking them to do is completely rewrite the CSS and JavaScript. That's a lot of time. Like it will have an impact, it will be positive, but it's kind of going to take them a long time to do that. And it's that kind of factor. Sometimes we go, next time you're updating these page templates, think about doing this. And that's always a factor in it, and making sure they're aware of it. And again, I think something that we are always keen to do is commercialise recommendations if we can. It's really hard with site speed, but I think if you can at least put a load time signal on there, and I know Google have that kind of, if your page is X faster, you get X amount more money, and I'm not sure I entirely buy that, if I'm honest. But it can be useful sometimes with some clients if they are looking to improve it.
Particularly, I think it's useful as well, like particularly if we've got a client that's already bought in and essentially just needs senior management to to sign it off. That kind of data where even though we're kind of like, is it 100% true? Just getting a number in front of them can really help just move the needle on it and get the ball rolling on it and get a little bit of support behind it. And we've definitely found that on shared clients before.
Yeah, and I think it's also good to try and find quick wins. It's not always easy, but like images are always a good one. If there's loads of huge images on a website, you're just like, optimize these, even if it is just an optimized JPEG, and understanding like the impact on it, and I think looking at things like going into DevTools and what's the maximum size this image is going to be shown at, like put it on a 4K screen and say, okay, that's huge. That's where things obviously where picture element comes in, and you set viewport widths. But if you kind of find that, I found sometimes the image is 4 times bigger than it needs to be, even on a 4K screen, you're like, can't you just resize this? You'll save yourself a lot of time on the load time, and also then optimizing it. But also I think you've got to be conscious of things like the quality of imagery. From our perspective, a lot of the imagery on our client sites is encouraging people to buy that product, whatever that product might be, and you don't want to just make it all grainy.
Yeah, exactly. It's got to be a careful balance between them, doesn't it?
I think again, stuff like Squoosh is brilliant for that, where you can drop an image in, you've got a slider to check the differences. You can then tweak settings and show them how much difference it would make. And obviously, clearly, it's not a bulk tool, but I think it's something where if you're refining what's going on a site, it's certainly worth a designer spending a few minutes per image on a page and just going, we can make that a bit better, we can make it a bit clearer.
Particularly on your key pages, your home page and your key templates, your key landing pages, it's worth doing that because it's where most of your traffic is, it's where most of the experience is, and also it's where most of the scores come from. User experience and Search Console are really weighting it by how many visits are on a page rather than per page metric. So if you've got 70% of your traffic going to your homepage, your homepage has got poor optimization, 70% of your visits are looking bad in Search Console and in Crux. Image
carousels are a big one as well. So you're often loading lots of images that might not be visible on load. I'm not a big fan of them anyway. I think it's a little bit of a lazy marketing tactic to put too much information, particularly on a homepage.
And how many people are really actually scrolling through your carousel? And how many people, because this I think my big boat with them is that you sat there and you're actually interested in one of the products and the automated scroll ones. So I'm like, I was going to click on the last one.
Yeah, and it's really, I feel like the UX on those is really poor. It's always different. The interface is always different, and you're like trying to click through. But I think obviously if the client is adamantly using it, I think lazy loading the further images and the carousels are a massive boost for the homepage, and making sure that you're getting it as quick as it can be. I guess talking about homepages as well, that takes us into page templates and making sure that when you're looking at sites, you actually think about looking at a template level.
Yeah, definitely. I think like one of the big pitfalls is that you start looking at like every page that GSE pulls up. Well, loads of those are going to be the same template. So realistically, you need to talk to your client and say, right, what are your major templates? So get your homepage, get your product landing page, get your blog, and get your product description page, and any other key variations of those, one of each. Because realistically, if they're built on a template level, it'll be the same stuff you're looking at each time. And then you do kind of an in-depth audit on each of those. Get them in Lighthouse. What is Lighthouse saying the problem is? What the core web vital scores they're failing on. Get them a web page test, and then those items that you bring out should be able to be applied across all those templates, and then it's just so much more efficient than diving straight in and just looking at this page is bad, let's do this page. It just means that you've got a clear handle on everything, and you can keep those templates and retest them once you've done the fix, and then you've again got the audit and you can see, right, everything's been implemented and we've got an improvement.
Exactly like you say, it's not just focusing on all the slow pages that might be. Oh, they're all blog articles are slow, and we've done an audit on all these slowest pages.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, but
it's gonna be the same problem with all of them.
What about the rest of the website? I think and then being able to feed that back, and I think focusing again maybe on templates that are commercially minded as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So obviously, blogs can be slow and they can be affecting overall core web vital scores at a site level potentially, but not always as commercially driven as your product listing pages or a brochure part of the site, whatever the business you're in. It's kind of look at your key commercially valuable pages as well, particularly the templates, and how you can improve those to make them as quick as you can. Right, well, we hope you found that chat there about site speed useful, sharing our tips and tricks and our tools as well. Download Cls Checker. If you want to learn any more about site speed, connect with either of us on LinkedIn and we'll be happy to answer your questions.